You are listening to MCC GeoPod, the geopolitical podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
Welcome everyone. This is the MCC GeoPod podcast. I am Zoltán Sütkei, your host, and with me today, Mr. Attila Demkó, the head of MCC Center of Geopolitics. Today we are talking about the war in Ukraine, and Attila Demkó was following this war since 2014 as his previous position as the head of defense policy in the Hungarian Ministry of Defense. So, Attila, thank you so much for coming in today. First of all, let's take a look back at this 6 months since the war started in February. What's the balance of this war? How successful was the Russians compared to their expectations, and how successful was the West?
Or Ukraine, because Ukraine is doing the fighting. Well, this war started in 2014. In February 2014. So this is the second and much more violent phase of this already 8-year-old war. And I think that both on the Russian side and both on the Ukrainian side and the West, there are big surprises. The war is not going as they were expecting. I think actually both the Russians and the Ukrainians and the West was thinking about or planning for a quick Russian victory, and I think that the Russia was not that far from some of its major objectives in the first days of the war. I'm talking about Kiev, but I think the Russians were truly overconfident before this phase of the war. They really underestimated Ukraine, and actually I was one of those who did not believe that Russia would attack. And the main reason for that was not believing that Russia is capable to do such a thing, but I mean in terms of will. But I think that number of troops that they attacked Ukraine was really low, and many of my former colleagues, soldiers, experts, believe that this number of troops and this equipment is not enough against Ukraine. But Russia had a plan to quickly seize Kiev, and there was no really plan B for a while at least. So I think for Russia it's a big disappointment, and in a way it's a failure. And for Ukraine and of course the West, it's in a way it's a surprise that Ukraine was holding so well. But that does not mean, and I think now we are in the West, at least in our own information bubble, that does not mean that Ukraine is winning. Ukraine is not winning this war. After the 6 months, 6 months of fighting, Russia is not winning in a big time either. But there are many Russian tactical victories which we don't talk so much about in the West, while they are effects on the ground. So what I see that both sides were wrong at the beginning of the war, but now I think the West and maybe Ukraine is wrong believing that Ukrainian military victory is possible. I think it's already a victory that Kiev was not taken. It's already a victory that Ukraine is a sovereign country. It's already a victory that Ukrainian army is standing after terrible losses, far bigger losses than admitted by the Ukrainian side, and fighting quite well. against Russia. But the overall picture, I think, is bleak for Russia, is bleak for Ukraine, and in many ways bleak for the West, at least for Europe, because of the energy crisis. So we are, after 6 months, in a way, we are a bit like in the situation in the First World War, that everybody thought that it's going to be like just a few weeks or months, but now it's dragging on, and it's now a battle of resources, a battle of will, and I think will is not lacking in Ukraine. The Ukrainians fight very bravely, but resources are lacking, both in Ukraine and in a way in the West, even in the West. While Russia was preparing for this war, now it's very clear, for 8 years, and the Russian economy is standing up much better to the sanctions than many expected. And Russian military is actually gearing up now. And everything is possible. So we are on the exact day of the 6 months anniversary. What is possible is I think it's even possible now that Russia will mobilize. And if that happens, it's a very, very bleak picture for Ukraine. But even without Russian mobilization, the energy crisis in Ukraine can be really terrible this winter. And the one thing is to stand up on the front lines, and the other thing is to have a functioning country behind the front line. And I think that is pretty much in danger.
And in the last few months, there wasn't much progress on the war in terms of like big territorial changes. I know there were like smaller changes on the front line, but it seems to me that the war was kind of slowing down, maybe getting into a frozen conflict. Could this be true, or who would benefit from this frozen conflict the most?
Well, I think we are far away from a frozen conflict as of the late August. Russia was pushing ahead in the last few months, but really slowly, except for the offensive at Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, in which they took a larger territory in a very heavy. In very heavy fighting. Russians, and of course, we have to say that of course Russia is not alone in this, and of course these are puppet states, but not fully. The Luhansk and the Donetsk People's Republic. So Luhansk People's Republic's troops played a role, quite a large role in the fighting in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. So what I see actually is not a frozen conflict; it's a conflict which is going on slowly, because Russia is reverted to the methods. At the first few days, they tried something very brave, attacking airports with crack elite troops, and they lost a lot because they were light troops. So what they are doing is exactly the opposite. No brave lightning operations, but less brave, very slow but methodical artillery destruction operations. So that's why it's so slow. But it doesn't mean that the Russians are not pushing ahead. There are sometimes problems that, for example, the Lysychansk army, or the Donetsk army, Luhansk army, the Luhansk army, after the taking of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, is not so enthusiastic to fight for the Donetsk region. And also it's a question that how the Donetsk army would be so happy to fight, let's say in Zaporizhia or in Kherson. There were problems with this. So it's a much more nuanced picture than the Western observers usually think, that Russia is fully ruling these two republics. You cannot rule fully soldiers, since they are risking their life. So what I see, that it's slow partly because of this, that Russia does not have enough forces which it fully controls, 100% controls. and because of severe Russian losses at the beginning in brave operations, and now they are doing it very slow. They are just destroy everything in front of them. So it's not about what Defense Minister Shoigu said, that it's about sparing civilian lives. No, it's about sparing Russian soldiers and Wagner PMC soldiers and the two militias fighters' life, because they don't have enough. They don't have enough infantry.
And as you said, this is like a full-scale attack from the Russian side. And I think I've heard some facts about ammunition, that Russia may have proper ammunition until December or January. Is this true, or could this be a battle of who has ammunition longer?
Well, Russia is using much more ammunition, since they are using the artillery much more than the Ukrainians. But these guesses that Russia has only until January enough ammunition. I think the Russian ammunition factories are on full gear now, and Western sanctions will not affect Russian ammunition making. Also, they took the Belarusian part of the Belarusian ammunition depots. And we have to realize that there are other countries who may help Russia. So what we believe, what the Western press is saying about China, that China is not fully on board and afraid of the sanctions. Actually, if China was not fully on board before, then the U.S. provocative and I think not very wise visits to Taiwan solve this problem. So China now is much more on board with Russia, and China is using the same artillery ammunition. The Chinese military, the Chinese artillery is actually former Soviet-based artillery. So they are using the same 122 and 152 millimeter artillery shells. They have very similar multiple rocket launchers. So, and if you look at that, I mean, even if Russia wouldn't have enough ammunition beyond January, I'm very skeptical about that. I'm pretty sure that they could get it from China and from some other sources. So I personally believe that there are many wishful thinking in the West, that Russian economy will fail. There will be Russian resistance. There are these hopes that China will leave Russia in this fight. No. So China is becoming more and more supportive of Russia. But the real surprise that India and many other countries, including Saudi Arabia, the Arab Emirates, and many others are far more supportive of Russia than they are supportive of Western efforts. So we are in our own information bubble about this, that we believe that the world is with the West and with Ukraine, while most of the world is neutral or supportive of Russia in this. If you look at China and India together, they are already 3 billion people, while the West is 1.1 billion people, and maybe Japan, South Korea is on the Western side. But most others are not. And if you look at what Iran can do, of course, Iran is using also the similar ammunition than Russia. So Iran can be one of the supporters. And if it's true that Iran will give unmanned aerial vehicles to strike UAVs, to Russia, then we see that Russia is absolutely not alone in this fight. And we can see the North Korean connection. North Korea also have huge stockpiles of the same Russian ammunition. So again, there is a lot of wishful thinking. And Russian economy is hurting. And I absolutely think that technological sanctions and sanctions on the inner circle of Putin are very much wise and on the long term can hit Russia, but not on the short term. And if you look at energy sanctions or what we did with oil and those plans with gas, they are hurting Europe far more than Russia. So if we hurt ourselves and Ukraine actually more than Russia, then again it was not very wise. But many of the things Europe is doing is morally driven and sometimes driven by the press and the mood of the day, and not by long-term thinking. And that's how our own beliefs try to bend reality. And reality is that Russia is not doing very well economically, but doing much better than many predicted.
So that it seems like Russia is in no rush to force a decisive victory over Ukraine in the foreseeable future. They can withhold some longer. What do you think? What may be this decision? What's the end point until Putin goes? What's his goal with this war?
Well, I think Russia made a huge strategic mistake and miscalculation at the beginning, ever believing that they can take over Ukraine or can have a government which is friendly to Russia. So I think they have given up on that. If not, they are up to a very nasty surprise. So I think in Western Ukraine or in the Kiev region, Russia, the current view on Russia is well, compared to that, the devil is somebody nice. So I think Russia only has bad options. One option is just to keep what they conquered. Of course, they have to get Donetsk, the remains of the Donetsk Oblast too, and then freeze the conflict. The other option is to mobilize and go for a kill. I mean, mobilize an army of 1 million or even more Russians, but then, of course, it has huge political consequences inside Russia, and go for a kill, to go for Odessa and to go for the Bujak region, so to cut Ukraine from the sea. And the third option, and these two last options, or even the three options, maybe can be a mixture between them, is to really kill Ukrainian economy during the winter, which would mean a total strikes on Ukrainian energy system, including gas and electricity, which would mean the freezing out of Ukraine during the winter. And since Europe is also in a huge trouble with natural gas, there would be few who could help Ukraine. So what's happening near Enerhodar? In Enerhodar, and we see it's like 9,000 megawatts of energy. So it's very. I mean, there are two power plants. The other is a coal-fired huge power plant, and of course we have other power plants Russia took. So they take it off from the Ukrainian grid. That's a problem. And of course, Ukraine can retaliate. They showed it in the Kursk region. They showed it in Crimea. But Ukraine can retaliate on parts of Russian territory, while Russia can hit all of Ukraine. So that's a very big difference. So what I see that there are terrible options for Russia too. All three options and the mixture of them are bad, because Russia is not winning the way they hoped. But for sure, it's less terrible than the options for Ukraine.
And it's good that you mentioned the retaliation from the Ukrainian side. The big event in the last few days was the assassination of Dugina, Daria Dugina. I've seen a lot of speculation on maybe the Ukrainians did it, maybe the Russians. What's your take on this?
Well, nobody knows, and possibly nobody will ever know what happened. One thing is very important, that neither Alexander Dugin, neither his daughter are very important for the regime. So they are not part of the decision making. They are not close to Putin. Dugin is not Putin's brain, not Putin's philosopher. I mean, these are again in the West circling around. The guy, the father is somebody who is a symbol of Russian nationalism, who used to have some influence on the Kremlin. I don't think he has much influence now. So it's very important that this both Mr. Dugin and Mrs. Dugina, they were symbolically, especially the father, symbolically important, but actually not really important for the Russian system. And in a way, Ms. Dugina is more important as a martyr than as a propagandist or as a thinker. Actually, she was very tough on Ukraine in the open, but both his father and she was also somewhat critical of the Russian regime. So it's not like that they're fully on board with Mr. Putin's war. I think for them, President Putin was too light on Ukraine. So there is criticism. Actually, we always forget that there is criticism from the nationalist circles in Russia on why Putin is so nice in brackets with Ukraine, why the Russia is not bombing Ukraine back to the Middle Ages, etc. We hear such Russian approaches. So this is too sometimes they are too much for the Kremlin. So it's very important to see that these Mr. Dugin and Ms. Dugina, they were not very close to the Kremlin. And if you look at from this angle, and if you look at from whose interest was this, in terms of interest, I think it's good for Russia what happened, because it's a young woman. It's very easy to identify with her that she died a terrible death. So in terms of propaganda, it's in the interest of Russia, not Ukraine. And even for Ukraine, I mean, if Dugin dies and the father dies, that could be celebrated. But a 29-year-old woman dies, what to celebrate on that, even in Ukrainian nationalist circles? So, and there are many questions regarding. For me, the real question was how fast the FSB put together this dossier on the supposed killer. But anyway, we don't know. So I think it's possible that Ukrainians did it. I think it's very unlikely that it was sanctioned by the government in Kiev. But we have to see that there are Azov and others are not 100% under control. All nationalist forces of Kiev government. So it's possible that they did it. It's possible that they did it, but the FSB saw it and they let it happen. So that could explain why they had such a dossier so fast. And the third option is that the Russians did it. I can imagine all three. It's the least likely is that it was ordered by Zelensky or somebody in Kiev. It wouldn't be logical. But of course, sometimes there is no logic in the war. There are emotions. But still, if we approach it with whose interest is it, then it's the best for Russia and the official Russian state. Somebody died who is not really close to the Kremlin, but can be used as a symbol. We will see in the next few days what is Russian response for the attacks in Crimea, in Kursk, and this. And if they use it as a tool to mobilize the Russian population, even if it's not an official mobilization, if they use it to explain a huge retaliation against Ukraine, then it makes it more likely that there are some Russian forces behind. But again, we don't know. And it's very important for everybody to understand that we know so little about this war, about the realities of this war. I'm talking to a lot of people from Ukraine, from Russia, from the West, from intelligence agencies, and it's really striking, and many of the best experts admit that they don't know. It's really striking how little we know, and they know, even those who are very close to the events, because and I think it's true even for the President of the United States and even for Vladimir Putin or President Zelensky, that they see only part of the picture. It's a big mosaic, this war, and they see, of course, a much larger part of the mosaic than we from the outside. But it's like the fog of war is for everyone. So I don't know. Actually, what I know that it's going to help Russia to mobilize, and that's the biggest problem of Russia, to mobilize enough people for the front lines. It's going to help with that. But it does not mean that it was not some Ukrainian nationalist who did it. We don't know.
And as for my last question, what does Hungary see from this mosaic you said? What's the viewpoint? Because Hungary is being absolutely neutral in this war, trying to balance and being pro-peace, but not making actual moves to draft a peace agreement or something. Could this be a moment for step in? Or?
Well, Hungary is not neutral in this war. Hungary is supporting Ukraine in many ways, economically, and even there are, through the European offers, even Hungarian taxpayer money is supporting weapons for Ukraine, even if Hungary does not give weapons directly to Ukraine. So this notion of neutrality, and sometimes even in the West, that pro-Putin, it's not true. 72% of Hungarian public absolutely is against now of President Putin. So he has a very negative evaluation among the Hungarian public. And Russia is seen by the majority of the public as aggressor. So we have to be factual in this. That's another matter, that majority of Hungarian public is totally against giving weapons directly to Ukraine or to have to do anything directly with the war. The last 8 years of relationship with Ukraine were not good. The leader of the Hungarian community, of the Hungarian minority, a historic minority who live in the Subcarpathia region, were pushed out by Ukrainians from Ukraine 2 years ago in a phony case of a phony investigation which reminds actually the style of Russia. Not a country which wants to join the EU and NATO. So actually there are many things that the outside world does not know about bilateral relationship. Ukraine was behaving against the Hungarian minority, Hungarian culture, very similarly how Russia was behaving towards Ukrainian culture and language. But most Hungarians still see that it's a terrible Russian aggression. But they want to stay away from this war. And what the government is doing is actually very close to what the people want. So some say that it's the government is influencing people. No, actually the government is doing polls on how the people see the polls. And people see it in that way, that most Hungarians doesn't want to do anything with this war. And it's very important to see that while Russia is seen in a more and more negative way, Russia is not seen as a threat to Hungary. So it's a geopolitical position. For Estonia or for Poland, who are directly neighboring Russia, I think it's very clear and very understandable that Russia is a threat. Or even for Romania, which is basically neighboring Russia through the Black Sea. But the closest part of Russia is thousands of kilometers away from Hungary. Of course, we are neighboring Ukraine, but nobody really believes that Russia can be our neighbor again. So it's a different geopolitical position. What Hungary is doing, to be Hungary as a peacemaker, we have to be realistic. Hungary is not Turkey. It's not a middle power. So I don't think that we can do too much to facilitate peace. Of course, I believe that what Hungary did in terms of opposing gas sanctions actually is good for Ukraine. And even what we did in opposing full oil sanctions is good for Ukraine, because it's not only the money, because Ukraine gets money for gas transfer and oil transfer. So not Russia, now we are paying Ukraine for the oil transfer. The Hungarian oil company is paying for the oil transfer. So this is not only that $500,000 a day, or I don't know how much is it, but in that range, but also the Russian oil is defending Ukrainian infrastructure. Russian gas is defending Ukrainian infrastructure. And I'm not saying this. The director of Naftogaz, the Ukrainian gas company, said that very clearly. So what I see that Hungarian policy is pragmatic. Most of the Hungarian assessments are that actually Russia will have a tactical victory at the end. It's very far from the assessment of most Western countries. We will see it in a year or two who was right and who is wrong. But it's much more nuanced, the Hungarian view about this war than let's say, the Western press, some of the Western press and Ukrainian press describes. So actually, I would quote Mr. Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, that Hungary is doing mostly what the West is doing, with some exceptions there, but Ukraine can live with that. So actually, really, you have to see that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians were taken as refugees, and we don't know, but maybe 100,000 or up to 100,000 is staying in Hungary. They are treated well. And Hungary is giving a lot of aid to Ukraine. And as I said, diplomatically, 95% of sanctions and UN votes was voted by Hungary the same way as with Poland or any other country. So we have to be, again, realistic and know the facts about Hungary.
Sadly, our time is up. So Attila, thank you so much for coming and having this discussion. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this MCC GeoPod episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.